Hey y'all, welcome to my webinar, Every Classroom is a Neurodiverse Classroom. I'm Dr. Emily King, former school psychologist, currently child psychologist, who's been working with neurodivergent kids and their families for over 20 years. I'm very passionate about helping our children at school, in the community, and in the family be all that they can be and surrounding them with the support and nurturing that they need. So every single classroom has a diverse range of needs. Educators know this, parents know this, but the problem is our education system and our curriculum are very standardized. So we have to think outside the box when we're thinking about adapting things, maybe modifying some things, and just thinking about giving our kids what they need to access learning. So one thing I'm going to walk through in this webinar is just a different frame of mind, thinking about every single student needing to be regulated, feeling safe and calm and connected before any learning can happen, rather than asking them to do the learning and then reacting when we get non-compliance or when we get refusal to learn things. So walk with me through this. And at the end of this video, if you feel like you want to learn more, there'll be an opportunity to do that as well. So the first thing I want to dive into is just this concept of neurodiversity. You may have heard the words neurodiversity and neurodivergence used interchangeably, but how I think of these as is the whole human population is neurodiverse. We all have different ways that we learn. As adults, we didn't call this neurodiversity, but we all know, are we visual learners? Are we auditory learners? Were we better at math or at reading? We all have our strengths. Everyone is different. Everyone learns in a different way. Some of our students are neurodivergent. Usually this means they have a diagnosis of autism spectrum, ADHD, learning differences, anxiety, nonverbal learning disability. They're twice exceptional, they're gifted, and have ADHD or a learning difference. There's a whole host of things that can be going on that can interfere with the traditional application of education. So those are the students that I typically work with, and those are the families that I help navigate the community and therapies. And what I've noticed over the years is that all the strategies that work for them work for everyone. It just isn't is difficult to do them with neurotypical kids. You can maybe tell them one time or maybe change something up one little way, but it's super helpful. So I really want to share ideas and strategies to rethink how every child is different, and we don't have to change that much about how we approach this in order to get them ready to learn. Now, if you've landed here after you downloaded the regulation roster, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't downloaded the regulation roster, go grab that on my website at learnwithdremily.com. That's a free resource that I created for teachers to use when they're getting to know their students at the beginning of the year, thinking about how does the student move? How do they access the noise and the sensory input in the environment? Do they need quiet? Do they love to talk? Do they need a plan because they get anxious without a plan? So some of those things are helpful to know. And of course, you can talk to your students' parents. They're going to be able to tell you and tell you exactly what might stress their child out, because whatever stresses children out is usually where we will see behavior. So as we move forward in this webinar, I just want to talk about mainly these types of neurodivergence, although there are several others. But when we think about ADHD or autism learning, and then this is kind of overlapped with lots of sensory processing differences, things are too much, or things need to be very quiet, or kids are very sensory seeking, they're very loud, and that's hard in a classroom. And then twice exceptional students, where it's just hard to predict because they have these really high skills in one area and need support in another area, and thinking that they're really great in one area or need support in the other area isn't intuitive to us right away, because we're thinking about them as one skill. And so I'm going to challenge you to think about children and their learning as lots of different skills in the same kid. So how are neurodivergent students different? And now I'm going to go into explaining some of these specific, types of neurodivergence, but There also are kids without diagnoses that have some slight attention weaknesses or need to move. Just because they may not have a diagnosis of something doesn't mean these strategies wouldn't also be really helpful. So think of all of your students when you're thinking through these things. So asynchronous skills. So just what I was saying about twice exceptional. Children with ADHD can be incredibly intelligent and verbal. They can be incredibly creative, yet they can't brush their teeth or they can't find their folder. These asynchronous skills of not being able to do something independently, yet being able to do high level things over here. Something similar can be very true for children with an autism spectrum diagnosis. They may have an incredible memory about something, but not be able to recall what was going on in the story that they read because that taps into inferential thinking, which is really hard for them. The other thing to think about with autism spectrum diagnosis is motivation and interests. And this is true too with ADHD. So what is motivating to that child? It might not be grades. It might not be sharing something with the class. That might be very anxiety provoking and makes them shut down. So we may have to look for something different to motivate them. Often kids are motivated with something aligned with their interests. So one of the things on the regulation roster you probably noticed is that I have a space to write children's interests, because that is where you're going to find all of your little, hooks into the child. So if you start to figure out what they're into and you can hook their attention with whatever it is, that's where you start building connection, because that child feels like, oh, they're paying attention to what I'm into. They know that I like to talk about this. And whenever you see that smile and see kids light up about that, you're on the right path. That's where you need to stay for building that connection. And then kids will also have sensory processing issues, and then that can lead to fatigue. In general, our neurodivergent kids fatigue more easily. Their nervous systems they seem to be more sensitive. So they may kind of tap out at certain times in the afternoon. They may not be able to work as long as some of their peers and need more breaks. There are things that we need to notice about their stamina, and often that can get you back to thinking about what is wearing them out. Sometimes it is a sensory overwhelm in terms of how loud things are, or in terms of how crowded things are, how many transitions there are. So what is depleting their energy? And we can think about that to start problem solving. Of course, some of these students will have communication differences. Maybe they can talk all day long about their interests, but not have a conversation with their peer, with you, about a flexible topic. Maybe they completely shut down when they are really, really anxious, and they talk at home and don't talk at school. These are all things to think about. And across the board, they struggle the most with emotional regulation compared to their same age peers. So in this webinar and in my course, The Neurodiverse Classroom, I do talk predominantly about elementary kids. And so what we think about in kinder to second is getting students ready to learn. So are these students ready to do they know how to be a student? Well, when children come into school, some of them may know how to be a student, and they've been to preschool and they've learned these things. And some of them may not, even if they've been to preschool, because they're not developmentally ready to regulate in that big classroom. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So what does it take to be a student? So let's think about it. It takes emotional regulation. Like, someone is asking me to do something I might not like, and I have to feel that emotion and regulate myself and still do it. Attention and impulse control. It's not my turn. I have to wait my turn in this classroom full of other people who also have needs. It's not my turn yet. And then I have to focus on what's being said so I can wait my turn and know what's expected of me. Learning is about taking risks and problem solving what to do when you fail. Learning is an incredibly vulnerable experience. So we have to feel safe and connected to the person asking us to do the learning. Collaborating with peers, social interactions where we may need to ask someone for help or have someone demonstrate something or put our ideas together, and then demonstrating our skills, actually remembering it and being able to show a teacher what we know. Now, as you might be noticing, these are all things that I just talked about being difficult for children who are neurodivergent in some way. So these are the areas we want to think about when we're thinking about looking for things that need to be supported, skills that need to be supported, and also pairing them with an interest, which is going to help raise motivation and attention so that a child can feel more comfortable. And using an interest will also usually decrease anxiety and help children feel more comfortable. Okay, so specifically in this webinar, I'm going to go through ADHD, autism spectrum, and anxiety, and talk about how those things impact learning. We'll delve way more into this into the teacher course. But just for now, I wanted to give you a little bit of information so you can take this with you into your classroom and start using it soon. So, of course, emotional regulation for ADHD will impact kids' learning. And what that looks like is usually a higher, more intense level of emotionality, sometimes a burst of emotion. For instance, this might come out as a child looking like kind of a sore loser or having trouble taking turns because that burst of energy is so fast and so impulsive that it's really hard to regulate. And so a child may feel immediately remorseful, or they may immediately lie because they realize, oh, I just did something that I didn't mean to do. And once their emotions and their thinking brain like meet up again, they realize that they didn't meet expectations, and then they feel bad about it. So that overlaps a little with the attention and impulse control. I think all educators know a child with ADHD is going to struggle with attention and impulse control. And so it's almost best to just help these kids slow down and feel their bodies, make sure they're getting enough movement, never take away recess from a child with ADHD. They need to move their body. They need breaks. That helps them regulate. Oftentimes it can be really helpful for them to move their body before they need to sit for extended periods of time. So those are all strategies that can help with that body regulation that will help with impulse control and with emotional regulation. Organization and time management is also very hard for these kids. And this is an executive functioning skill. You can definitely read up on executive functioning if you are teaching a student with ADHD. Executive functioning is our ability to plan and organize a task, start it, initiate it, focus on it through completion, problem solve along the way, and then remember what we're doing and turning it in. Basically, a project. Anytime that a child is doing an assignment or a project, they're going through all the stages of executive functioning. So organizing those things, managing their time, any of these skills that are weaker are potentially, stress inducing for these students. So helping them recognize this part is hard for me, I need a strategy. That's a great thing for teachers and educators to be able to step in and help scaffold. Motivation, initiation, and focus, also a part of executive functioning. Motivation is your secret weapon here, because if you can motivate a child by helping them do like a project that's on their interest, or helping them show what they know in a way that works for them, if they need to make a video to demonstrate it, if they need to speak in front of the class, if they don't need to speak in front of the class, whatever makes them comfortable, however you can flex those things to bring anxiety down and help them feel more confident in demonstrating mastery of what you're asking them to do. ADHD kids are awesome. They're creative, they're intelligent, they have ideas that we may not even think of because we're thinking very big picture, and they're thinking usually pretty focused on something and really deep and focused on something. And so letting them just share all those ideas, and obviously needing some help to organize them, but that's going to be really helpful to demonstrating mastery, is to let them lead with that motivation. Okay, so how does autism spectrum impact learning? So if you're an elementary teacher, sometimes children will come into kindergarten with an autism diagnosis. We're getting a little bit better in my field, identifying children younger and younger. Sometimes you will have a student that doesn't have a diagnosis and you're suspecting autism. Those are all things to talk to your school psychologist about and to consult with the parents and administrators at your school. But if you're suspecting this, you would maybe want to start go ahead and problem solve, some of the interest and motivation. So a child may not, on the autism spectrum, may not be motivated socially. They may just be motivated by their interest. And when I say socially, I mean motivated to make you happy or make a peer happy. They really might be just in their own space, in their own world, and their own ideas. And we can use those interests and use their motivations to help them work on some things. So there could be small tweaks to some of the tasks that they do, some of the visual schedules that you may make for them that gain their interest and kind of hook in their motivation that can help them feel more connected to some of the learning they're doing. Many of these children are literal thinkers, they're concrete thinkers, and they have difficulty making inferences. This doesn't show up as difficult until kind of the end of second grade, where we're starting to do more reading comprehension tasks. But things like puns and idioms can be difficult for some children with an autism diagnosis. So we want to support their play as well as their reading comprehension. Okay, so how are play and reading comprehension connected? Well, think about it for a minute. Play is all about predicting what's going to happen around me, and reading comprehension and making inferences is all about predicting what will happen in a story. So many times children who have weaknesses in social play or very concrete and literal in their play when they're younger will also have some difficulty with inferences when they're asked to work on reading comprehension. That doesn't mean that these skills will never develop. It just means that those skills may be developing on their own time frame for that child. Every child on the autism spectrum is developing at their own rate. You're just watching it unfold in front of you. But usually when the play skills kind of click and they can make some, do a few pretend play things and you can build on that. That's why stories and social stories can work so well, because you can help children understand things within a story that goes along with their thinking, as opposed to someone else's thinking that's asking them to think from that person's perspective, because perspective taking is weaker for them because they work the best thinking about things from their point of view. Many children with an autism spectrum diagnosis have fine motor weaknesses. So they maybe have occupational therapy. You may have an OT at school giving you strategies for these things. But usually in early elementary, it's kind of a battle we're not fighting quite yet. We want to get students ready to learn. We want to strengthen their fine motor, but there are other ways we can help them show what they know and show their literacy skills. And so thinking about kind of flexing timelines and the way you ask kids to strengthen their hands and show what they know, and definitely lean on your OT for strategies for supporting fine motor weaknesses. Social collaboration and problem solving, of course, can be hard when you can only, you tend to only see things from your perspective or feel most comfortable seeing things from your perspective. And so across all elementary ages, and in the younger ages, it's with play, and the older ages, it's more with group work. You know, we need to think about what is this child's interest? What is their strength? And can we give them that role within a group? And can we scaffold some group participation leaning from a place of their strength and what they're comfortable with? One of the things that we do a lot with all children is just kind of a free-for-all on the playground, or a free-for-all in, a PE class. We need to really think about structuring some social things for kids on the autism spectrum to teach them the back and forth of some of these games, some of these roles in a group, to help them think more concretely, use those concrete literal skills of understanding to help teach some of those more abstract things that neurotypical brains just pick up from observation, sometimes have to be explicitly taught to kids with an autism spectrum diagnosis. Many kids with this diagnosis also have a little bit slower processing speed. And the reason why I mentioned this in coordination with sensory integration is because, in my opinion and all my experience over the years, I see that the more stressed and sensory overwhelm that there is, obviously it's slower to process what's going on. And of course, these aren't, 100% of the time related, but they do seem to interfere with each other. So if a child is having a stress response or overwhelmed in an environment, they're going to be slowing down to take care of their body first and maybe breathe and need a break. And they're going to be processing things slower. The flip side can also be true. If they are just a slower cognitive processor, that can be stressful because they're watching all of their peers go faster. And so noticing, if we need to shorten assignments to make that child feel like they're successful in the early grades, when it doesn't really matter so much if we shorten things, if they're showing mastery, thinking about flexibility early on so that we can build up their stamina, build up their mastery as they get older and they can do more and more. Okay, so how does anxiety impact learning? Lots of us have anxiety. This is probably, overarching, especially after the pandemic, and lots of kids who, were not experiencing anxiety before are experiencing it. And then lots of children that are neurodivergent have anxiety because the world is a lot to them. School is a lot to them. So we can have sensory overwhelm, kind of that physical feeling of anxiety. Everything is like too crowded or too loud, or it's chaotic, or I'm anticipating the bell or the fire drill. These are things that could send a child into sensory overwhelm, even if they're not currently happening. For instance, if there's a fire drill once a month and a child has a really great memory and knows what date it is and that it hasn't had a fire drill this month and it's the 30th of the month, that child may be on pins and needles all day. And if we don't know the nuances of that, we would have no idea why they had an off day, for instance. That's just one example. Separation anxiety can happen, of course, more in the younger years. But what this is the child not being ready to regulate themselves on their own. So many young children are ready to go to kindergarten. They kind of move on and they work through that regulation on their own at school. They form a relationship with their teacher. They feel safe at school, so they can regulate with mom and dad at home and regulate with teacher at school, and they trust the situation. Some children are very, very connected to their parents and need that regulation and struggle to build more trust with the adults at school. So it's harder for them to separate and harder for them to trust those relationships at school and have a high anxiety for when they're separating. So those are some things that you may notice. And if a child is stressed about not being with their parent, that can impact, that's taking up space in their brain. That's impacting their learning. And so thinking about strategies about, helping a child build those connections of the trusted people at school. It could be a social story. It could be a plan to help the child understand that everyone is their village and their team and is helping them stay safe. Test anxiety, of course, starts to come up, especially third grade and higher when we have more standardized tests. Some kids get overly focused on perfectionism or pleasing the teacher and are very motivated to please the teacher. Some kids don't have externalizing behaviors, but internalize the anxiety of, if I'm just the perfect student and I do everything I'm supposed to be, then I'm okay. And that's exhausting for students, and that can also very much stress them out. Social anxiety, of course, can come up if a child needs to speak in front of the class. Sometimes children have social anxiety just about walking up to the teacher and asking for help. So if a child is avoiding you, if a child never speaks up at school, these are things to talk to the parent about to see how they look different at home in the community, because in a group of people, their social anxiety may be overwhelming them and they may look very different in the classroom. In general, this is just a feeling of too much too fast, of whatever it is. So if a child is never smiling and never laughing and just kind of deer in the headlights, or you're seeing just they look like they're white knuckling it through the day, something is happening with that child's emotional regulation where they're not fully relaxed. They don't know where to go to feel safe and connected. And those are some things to look for and to start collaborating with the parent to help that child feel comfortable at school. Okay, so why does anxiety matter? I've mentioned this a little bit, but just to get to the bottom of it, in order for us to learn, we have to take risks. But in order to take risks, we have to feel safe and trust the people around us, because we don't want to mess up in front of people that we feel like could give us, negative feedback or criticize us. So if a child is overwhelmed with their environment or the demands that are given to them, they won't be able to access the thinking part of their brain. We know from neuroscience that when our emotional brain is flooded with emotion, we cannot access the thinking brain. It's like it gets hijacked, and all we can do is survive. And that's where our survival states come from. And so if we're overwhelmed with emotion and we're flooded with emotion and we go into fight, flight, or freeze, and then you see, and sometimes it's fawn, that's when kids just kind of go limp on their desk. If those things are happening, that child's thinking brain is shut down and they're not able to learn or perform at that moment. So our job at that moment is just to regulate, co-regulate with them and help them feel safe and connected. But in order to effectively problem solve with them, we have to be regulated too. And this is one of my huge passions in my work, is helping parents notice their own regulation, helping you, the teachers and educators and principals, understand your own regulation. Because as much as we feel like we're kind of faking it and acting like we're okay, I truly believe these sensitive kids can feel that we're uncomfortable too. So if we can model a deep breath, if we can call in a colleague and take a 5-minute break, there are things that I want teachers and administrators to be talking about. You are a team, and there will be times, you are human, and there will be times when you feel overwhelmed in your own classroom. And we have to rely on each other. I know this from being a school psychologist. We have to rely on each other as the team to be the best adult for that student. Okay, so we've seen the behavior, we're noticing it, but what is underneath it? You'll notice that anger is not on this list, and that's intentional because anger is what we usually see. Explosive anger, maybe throwing something, kicking something, calling someone a name, all of that is anger. And underneath it is usually one of these. Could be some other things, but these are the main ones. Frustration with the task, anxiety about what's being asked. I can't do it. I'm not going to be able to do it. Loneliness of I don't know how to ask to be included, but I want to be included. Disappointment that whatever they wanted to do didn't go their way. They weren't picked. It's not their turn. And just that general loss of control. I'm in this school situation and nothing is in my control here, and I don't feel good at what they're asking me to do. I don't think young kids can really express this in a really insightful way. And so we have to be detectives to figure it out. But these are absolutely consistent patterns I've seen over the last 20 years of working with these children. So how does this intersect with traditional discipline? So let's think about traditional discipline and why that works, because it does work for some kids. So adults set the behavioral expectation and consistently hold it. They hold those limits and say, this is expected, until the student learns to follow the rules. So a student will feel safe in a building or with a population of kids and teachers to know that these are the safe ways everyone's supposed to act. So I trust that the teacher is going to consistently set these expectations and not let anybody hurt me and not let anybody hurtful come into this building and things like that. So the students can understand all these things, but what happens when they're not able to do what they've been asked to do? They also understand that they can't do it. And if they're repeatedly unable to do the thing, then they start to feel defeated. So this is where neurodivergent kids can come in. This is where kids with some trauma can come in, of not having the skills to connect and to problem solve that on their own. So we have to, again, be detectives, figure this out, and join the child with why isn't traditional discipline of setting the expectation, modeling it, and having them rise to the occasion, why isn't that working? Probably a skill deficit. So this is how I visualize it in my brain. So I'm sharing it with you. I see the space between the expectation that's being asked and the skill that that child has is the amount of stress or anxiety that child or person is going to feel. For instance, if you sat me down in a classroom and everyone was speaking Chinese, I have no skill level. in Chinese or Mandarin, I would not know what to do, and my anxiety level would be pretty high. But if you put me in a Spanish classroom, I know a little bit, so my anxiety level would be a little bit smaller than that because my skill level would rise just a bit. If I was in a classroom where everyone was speaking English, I wouldn't have any anxiety. So language is an easy analogy, just because it's so clear for a lot of us to feel like, wow, I really wouldn't know what was going on if I was in a classroom and they were speaking another language. So think about the skill level for, let's say you're being asked to do a project and you have a really weak organization and you can't really visualize all the steps to this. And the expectation is that it's due on Friday and you don't have any help figuring this out. Your anxiety and stress is going to be pretty big. But what happens if we take that project example and we maybe adjust the expectations, so maybe there's longer to do the project? The other idea would be to adjust or support the skill level by scaffolding some supports. This is where we would come in and help a student plan out a project, and they're still doing the project, but we would help them plan it out. So that's really an upper elementary, idea and strategy. An example, something that would be given for lower elementary would just be, remaining in your seat. What if your expectation was to remain in your seat all day long, but your body needs to move to stay regulated? And so your skill level to sit in that seat all day long is just not there. And so your anxiety level about sitting still all day long might be this big, but then your teacher allows you to stand up, but just stay in this area. So the expectation has changed, and maybe a child can listen better if they can just stay in that area. And then you're talking to the student about, like, I know your body needs to move right now, and that's okay. So can you listen better when your body gets to move? These are just the little questions we can ask kids to build their awareness of what we're noticing, but also just to keep tweaking things until we figure it out. So here are just some ideas about adjusting expectations to prevent this stress. Maybe we need to talk less. Some kids are strong readers and not strong at all of the words coming at them. These are just things to try, and also to check with parents about what works, but also check with if that child has been evaluated before. The psychologist that's done that evaluation probably listed lots of strategies. Get consent to talk to that child's therapist, occupational therapist, speech language therapist outside of school. If someone has worked with this child before, they have figured out something about communication. Do we need to change the pace? So I tend to talk fairly quickly. And the good thing about something that's on audio, you can slow me down or speed me up if you need to. But sometimes when I get excited, I talk quickly. Sometimes teachers have very exuberant personalities that might be overwhelming to a child, even though another child loves that exuberance. So think about how your tone, your volume, your energy matches with that child, and see what you can do to adjust. Aligning anything with the student's interest. That could be a visual schedule. That could be a story. It could be literacy, anything that you can take outside the box and think about, how can I kind of hook in this child's motivation to think more about kind of what I call their happy place. If their happy place is about this interest and they know a lot about this interest, you should see their face light up, and you can talk to their parents and their therapists, if they have therapists outside of school, about when does their face light up. That's the good stuff. Smaller steps. Do we need to just break this down and, in terms of a project, or even in terms of a worksheet or a task that you're teaching, breaking it down into much smaller steps? And your special education teachers in your building are going to be masters at this. Even if you have a student who doesn't have an IEP or doesn't even have a 504, there's plenty that you can teach just by slowing it down and chunking it into smaller steps and making it visual. Maybe we need to talk less and have them read or look at pictures more, but sometimes it's videos. Sometimes it's demonstration. A lot of times kids with weak executive functioning, they have trouble visualizing what done looks like. So if you can show them what a finished product looks like, they can usually reverse engineer it in their mind and figure out how to get there. The best example I have for this is like every art teacher on the planet has like the final product as they're demonstrating how to get started. And then by the end, your project should, or your painting or your sculpture should look something like this. We can do that in academics. Think about whatever you're asking a child to do, and it doesn't have to be an academic thing. It could be, when this space is cleaned up, this is what it looks like, and show them a picture. This is what cleaned up space looks like. This is what your desk and chair and backpack cubby should look like when it's all tidy and clean. So think about what done looks like and how you can show those things to kids, especially if they have some weaknesses in executive functioning. So these are the main thoughts we want to prevent in our neurodivergent kids, but really in all students. So if you feel like a student is feeling like, I can't do it, this is too much, and I see now that that word is spelled wrong, I'll never finish it at all, I'll never finish it on time, all of these can lead to, I'm not good enough. And that's, of course, what we want to avoid, okay? And I know you feel that as an educator, you always want to avoid that. Now, is it okay for a child to think these things once or twice? Of course. This builds resilience, right? I'm talking about pervasive, continued, negativity and never feeling successful, feeling defeated and not wanting to walk back into that classroom, not wanting to walk back into that school. That's what we don't want to happen. We want to keep this love of learning alive for kids so that they know that I'm not going to know everything. I'm going to have to problem solve things, but I have this person, this teacher that I trust that's going to help me do it. So keep thinking about, fair doesn't always mean equal. Your kids are not going to get the same thing across the board. I teach kids this all the time when they say, why does so-and-so get to chew gum and I don't? Or why does so-and-so get to use the keyboard to type and I have to write it? Fair doesn't mean equal or the same. Fair means every student gets what they need to succeed. Kids are getting really good at accepting all this diversity, especially the neurodiversity. We're the ones that need to think a little bit differently about all of this and to think you don't need an IEP to do something in a different way. There are absolutely kids who need an IEP, but there are also small things we can do in classrooms to help all children access everything they need in just a slightly different way that works for their nervous system. So if this was helpful and you want to learn more, you can head on over and get on the wait list for the Neurodiverse Classroom, which is a teacher course that comes out twice a year in the fall and in the spring. In that course, there is a self-guided, there's 6 45 to 60 minute sessions that are self-paced, pre-recorded on your own. And then you will also get to join the student-only Facebook group where you can connect with like-minded colleagues, because if you feel like you're on an island out there, I'm the only one thinking about my classroom this way, I promise you're not the only one. And you can join that Facebook group to start talking about strategies and talking about ideas. And then you will also get a certificate of completion from that course for 6 professional development or continuing ed hours, whatever your district needs. And to do that, you would go to learnwithdremily.com/teachers. So if you want to gain a better understanding of neurodiverse needs of your students, help them feel safe and advocate and show ownership of their learning, that's what I'm passionate about. That's what I'm here to keep talking about. And I hope you will join me over on the course. Thanks for being here.